I wanted to work through a problem that involves one-dimensional motion and illustrates some of the quantities, some of the concepts from lecture class 2. So in this problem, we're imagining a person who drives on a trip in her car, and that trip involves 3 separate stages or 3 separate steps. In stage 1, she drives at 90 kilometers per hour for 40 minutes. In stage 2, she drives 95 kilometers an hour for 10 minutes. And in stage 3, she drives for 60 minutes at 30 kilometers per hour. And the question is, what was the average speed for this trip? The speed changed over the trip. There were 3 different speeds for the trip. What's the average speed? To figure out the average speed, we've got to figure out the ingredients in the average speed for the trip. We've got to figure out the total distance that the person drove, and we've got to figure out the total time for which the person drove. Now, the total time for which the person drove is pretty simple to figure out. We just add 3 times. The total distance that the person drove is a little bit more complicated to figure out. We've got to figure out the distances in stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. But that's the basic procedure. So let me go ahead and start that. Firstly, the total time of the trip. I'm just going to call it T. And it's going to be the sum of the time for the first stage of the trip, the time for the second stage of the trip, and the time for the third stage of the trip. Now, the first stage was 40 minutes. The second stage was 10 minutes. The third stage was 60 minutes. And so that's a total of 110 minutes. And equivalently, 1.83 hours. So that's the total time. Now the total distance. I'll call the total distance D. Is the distance stage 1 of the trip, D1, distance for stage 2 of the trip, D2, plus the distance for stage 3 of the trip, D3. Now we're not directly told the distances for those 3 stages, but we can figure the distances from those 3 stages from the fact that the distance traveled in stage 1 is the speed for stage 1 times the elapsed time for stage 1. And likewise, the distance traveled in stage 2 is the speed for stage 2 multiplied by the time for stage 2. And the distance traveled in stage 3 is the speed for stage 3 times the time for stage 3. And we know the speeds for each of the 3 stages, and we know the times for each of the 3 stages. So we can figure out the distances traveled for each of the 3 stages. It makes sense if the length of time for stage 1 was longer, the distance traveled in stage 1 would be further. If the length of time, if the speed for stage 1 was faster, then the distance traveled would be further. And so this equation is going to tell us the total speed traveled. So let's start filling in the numbers. For distance 1, we've got to multiply the speed, 90 kilometers an hour, by the time. And the time is 40 minutes or 0.67 hours. For stage 2, we've got to multiply the speed, 95 kilometers per hour, by the time. For stage 2, it's 10 minutes, so that's 0.167 hours. And then for stage 3, the speed was just 30 kilometers per hour. And the time taken was 1 hour. So we have to multiply these speeds and times and then add up the 3 distances. And when you do that, you'll notice that the hours in the denominators and the hours in the numerators cancel each other out for each of the 3 terms, and you're left with units of kilometers. And if you do the calculation, and the total distance traveled turns out to be 105.8 kilometers. Now our work's almost completely done. For the average speed, well, we can use the definition of average speed. Is the distance traveled divided by the time taken. That total distance traveled is 105.8 kilometers. That total time elapsed is 1.83 hours. And 105.8 kilometers divided by 1.83 hours comes out to be 57.8. Kilometers per hour. And that's the average speed of the car. So again, just to summarize, given the person's trip involving these 3 stages, to figure the average speed, we needed to find first the total distance traveled, and second, the elapsed time. The elapsed time, we just added the individual times of the 3 stages. The distance, we had to figure the individual distances of the 3 stages. And then we could use the equation for average speed, distance divided by time.